So I'm going to croon to you, but I don't have a lapel mic. Anyway, my job in the beginning is to introduce the novel, and Bright, of course, will talk about what he did with the novel. Okay? And so we'll begin by talking about names, Dream of the Red Chamber. Within the novel itself, it describes it having 5 different titles. The Story of the Stone, Passionate Monk's Tale, Mirror of the Romantic, For the Romantic, A Dream of Red Mansions, and then 12 Young Ladies of Jinling. There are different translations of those titles. They actually appear in the first chapter, and also the author's name, Sao Chuechin, also appears in the first chapter, but as editor and not as the author. Oldest translations use that Dream of the Red Chamber. This was not really published until quite recently. It was in manuscript, 1890s. For the longest time, this abridged version was the only thing in circulation. Again, Dream of the Red Chamber, just one chamber. Here we get plural, which is a better idea, Dream of Red Mansions. This was published in the mainland by the Yangs, Yang Xianyi and Gladys Yang. This is the most popular and esteemed translation now by David Hawkes. You can see when it first came out in 1973, they wanted you to know that it was also the Dream of the Red Chamber, but he had a different idea of what red chambers were all about. And so that's the title page, 1973. And then a total of 5 different volumes. And here they are sitting up here, 2,500 pages, right? Twice as long as War and Peace. And then once we get to the last 40 chapters, his son-in-law, John Minford, David Hawkes began first 80 chapters, son-in-law, family business, did the last 40 chapters. And we have a new name here, Gao E. Here described as editing. Some people say that he completely messed up the last 40 chapters and did it all himself. How does it begin? The novel begins with an odd kind of statement. This is the first chapter. Well, duh, this is the first chapter, isn't it? And in the Yang's translation, they follow that. And it's basically describing the meaning of the chapter title. We have characters named, sorry about the romanization system here, it's bastardized. Zheng Shuyin and Jia Yutsun are 2 minor characters. And there's puns involved. Zheng Shuyin is true facts concealed. Jia Yutsun is false words are preserved. But what's interesting, and this is Hawkes' version, which he puts as introduction, not the beginning of the novel. He left the first part out, which says this is a quotation of the author himself, complaining about his wretched state and how he had no single skill to earn a decent living. But he still wants to tell his own life, because by that he can tell the life of the wonderful girls that he knew. And this describes supposedly how he wrote the novel. And so in the beginning, that chunk was actually in a prefatory item for one of the manuscripts. And here it is here. Clearly commentary and not part of the novel, but written into the beginning of the novel later on. And so the novel begins with the story of a stone. In another sense, it's a story on the stone, because the text is written on the stone. And we have a monk and the Taoist who find the stone in different versions, different editions. It's either the stone's idea, I want to see what the world is like, or the monk and the Taoist say, let's take you down and clear up those thoughts you've got, right? You'll find out that it's not a good idea. Monk and a Taoist, right? And then you think it might be strange to have a story of a stone. There are Chinese stories of love stories between stones and men. This is a Puzong Ling story about a love story, man and a stone. It's interesting because stone is, of course, usually wuqing, with no feelings, but our main character, of course, has feelings. He has to deal with the fact that to be enlightened, he has to become without feelings, and how to deal with that. So the Chinese are pretty big on stones. This guy had his favorite stone painted 8 different ways. These are only 2 of them. And then this is from a pack of cards with nice looking stones, right? Stones are very big. And so in the novel, in the first chapter still, a new kite comes along, Kong Kong Dao Ren, translated as Vanitas by Hawkes, and he reads the text on the stone and he's not impressed. But then the stone says, wait a minute, and he persuades Vanitas that it's very important. And in fact, it leads to the enlightenment of Vanitas. He changes his name to Brother Amor, the description of that process of how he becomes enlightened. And then the novel begins with another story, leading back to the stone. There's Gentry in here, the true facts concealed guy. He has a dream in which he meets the same damn monk and Taoist again. And they're on their way to deliver the stone here, right? And then he finds out that there's a backstory, a debt of tears. This stone was a page. He got legs and so forth. And he watered a plant. And so in the novel, the stone will, the main character in the novel is called Daiyu. He'll be born with the stone in his mouth, but transformed as a jade and smaller so he doesn't get a toothache. And then he, by watering the plant here, enabled her to turn into a human form. She decides she wanted to be reincarnated so she could repay that debt of tears. And so the novel is tragic because once the tears are done, she's going to die, right? It's fated. There are reference works on, for instance, all of the botanical material in the novel. According to this reference works, they think that Lin Daiyu is really a mushroom. Okay. There she is. And this is the land of illusion where all this stuff with the monk and the Taoist before they go down to the world is supposed to be happening. Looks like you can fall off the edge and get hurt yourself. And then we go back again after Genshin wakes up from his dream. Here he has his daughter, and the monk and the Taoist tell him, watch out, your daughter is ill-fated. So throughout the novel, there are these hints about what's going to happen later on to the characters, and all these hints are bad. This is the Jaiyu-sun character that I mentioned. He's a neighbor, and then he meets the maid in the Jun household. And then Jun decides to fund his going off to school to pass the examinations. And then after he's gone, there's a festival, and a servant takes Genshin's daughter to go play, and he takes a leak, puts the kid down, and she gets stolen, right? So it begins with a dire story of Genshin's daughter. And then it's contrasted with another story, but the Juns are wiped out by a fire. And so eventually, Genshin is ready to get enlightened with a prompt from the Taoist who shows up. Looks rather different here. And then the Taoist sings about how salvation should be won, but ambition is a problem, riches is a problem, loving wives are a problem, children are a problem. And Genshin gets it, and he writes this commentary, which ends up with very famous lines, "In such commotion does the world's stage rage. As each one leaves, another takes the stage. In vain we roam. Each in the end must call strange land home. Each of us with that poor girl may compare who sews a wedding gown for another bride to wear." Sato Shin's a pessimist. Here is Genshin in his enlightened stage. Doesn't look too much fun. But we have an early example of how you leave the family, how you become enlightened. This is what's going to eventually happen to Daiyu in one fashion or other. This is Jaiyu-sun, who's now become an official and sees the maid, and she gets married, and she's going up in the world, while as Genshin's daughter, remember she got stolen, she's going down in the world. Jaiyu-sun becomes the tutor to the incarnation of the mushroom, Lin Daiyu. And so the second chapter is all about an indirect introduction to the family of Daiyu, the Jias. And then Jaiyu-sun is given the job to escort Lin Daiyu up to the capital to join the Jia family. And the Jia family is run by a matriarch who's very old, and got hundreds of people there. This is the first meeting between Lin Daiyu and Daiyu. Remember, he has a jade that was born in his mouth, and they put it around his neck. When he hears that Lin Daiyu has no such jade, he's pissed and tries to break his own, right? And this thus begins a very troubled relationship between the two of them. Lin Daiyu spends the night crying. Maid tells her, just wait. This is the beginning of the 6th chapter. Lin Daiyu enters the Jia household from the outside. So we see this new world from her eyes. Another way to give us an idea what the Jia household is about is the arrival of a Granny Liu. And here's a narrator telling us about how am I going to tell this story? And all of a sudden a person shows up and gives details about how big this family is and so forth like that. And here is Granny Liu. She is a farmer and gives a different perspective on the Jia household, which is very big. This is somebody's idea of the Jia household, which is 2 different branches, the Ning side and the Rong side. We know more detail about the Rong side than the Ning side because most of the novel is on the Rong side. This is an aerial view, right? They had airplanes back then. And so a problem with a novel is how to deal with all those characters. Here's a family tree. In the translation, Hawk's translation, he has a list of all the characters that appear in each of the 5 volumes. Goes on, right? Could be worse. And also genealogical charts, where you can find out who was married to who produced who, and so forth like that. There are 4 different important families, the Jia, the Wangs, the Shis, and the Xues. And Chinese, of course, have also been keeping track of genealogy. This is a sequel to the novel that includes the different generations of the Jia family, because they're afraid that you're going to get confused. This is the kinship chart. And of course, the Chinese are very particular about the precise relationships between people. Within the novel, mostly people are referring to each other by their kinship terms. In the novel, there's a help for the Chinese reader, which is that members of the same generation will have the same character or part of a character. The eldest generation has the character Dai in the middle. Next generation below has a Wen character on the side. Next generation below that has a Jade character in it. Bao Yu, precious jade, is of that generation. And then there's a plant generation. Big families would have a poem that would name the different members of the generations like that. Here is Jia Bao Yu. Okay. And then another way to keep track of the characters in the novel is the way that they relate to other characters. And there's actually a double of Jia Bao Yu, a Zhen Bao Yu. There's a pun there. Jia is a homophone with Jia, meaning false. Zhen, homophone with a word meaning true. He has a dream of him, eventually meets him, is very disappointed by his double. There's other characters like these, I won't name them, that also appear in the novel that clearly are very similar to Jia Bao Yu. Jia Bao Yu spends all his time inside, and somebody like Liu Xiangyan gets to be kind of a Bravo type figure who runs around outside. This is Lin Daiyu, our mushroom. She has a parent who she teaches to recite her poetry. She is also related to other characters in the novel. I don't have pictures for all of them, but that's one way that the characters in the novel can be structured and organized. Back to Jia Bao Yu again. And so presumably we have a love story, just the 2 of them. But there's a third person, and they're always having spats. Here they're having a spat. But then there's a third person, it's very important, Shi Bao Chai. And so they're all cousins, but you can marry your cousins back then, cross cousins. This is Bao Chai's mother, and then her very bad brother, Xue Pan. And so you can see their connections right in their names. The Jade character of Lin Daiyu and Bao Yu is shared. The Bao, meaning precious, is shared between Jia Bao Yu and Xue Bao Chai. And people have studied what kind of cross-cousin marriage is better. And they come to the conclusion that Xue Bao Chai had the edge all along because of the way she was related. She had an aunt already in the family, whereas Lin Daiyu did not. And there's all kinds of genealogical charts in that article. Oh boy, huh? Another take on the novel, well, first take what is a love story. Second take is that Mao Zedong says it's all about the death of feudal culture. And so he wrote an article, a letter, and then there was a nationwide campaign against Yu Pingbo and against the surrogate, his master, Hu Shi, who was not living in China at that time. And then the idea, again, is that it's all about social criticism, about class struggle, right? And the chapter that Mao supposedly liked the best was the 4th chapter, in which Jia Yuzhen, again, commits malfeasance, legal malfeasance, because he's beholden to the big clans, particularly the Jia clan. So here we go, back at that picture of the 2 households. Another story you can talk about the novel about is this garden here, the grand garden, the Da Guanyuan, Grand Prospect Garden. And some commentators and some readers will think that the novel is all about coming to a grand understanding of the entire novel. How do the individual pieces fit together? And so how does the garden work? The garden is established because Jia Bao Yu's elder sister becomes an imperial concubine, is allowed to visit home, but must have special quarters to do so. And those are pretty big special quarters. And here they are getting the garden ready. And this is artistic license, of course, probably not this big. But here the concubine has come to visit, traveling by boat, and then they have a big party and they write poetry. This is a chart, there are many, many different kind of charts of people trying to figure out where the different residences in the gardens were in relationship to each other. And then most of these residences then later become residents for people we already know. Jia Baoyu, this is where Jia Baoyu would end up living later in the garden. The structure of the Jia household, if you're thinking only of the women, is again the matriarch is on top. She's eldest. All these folks with crosses are dead. And then Wang Shifeng is the person who's the hands-on manager of the household, again female. There is a grandmother Jia again. And what about the men? The men are all degenerate. This is posed as a question, but there's no doubt. They're almost all degenerate, except for perhaps Jia Baoyu's father has his own problems. So they have lots and lots of parties in this garden, and it's a women's kingdom. And it's also a young, unmarried women's kingdom. We do have some visitors here, such as the matriarch, but in daily life, it's only the girls and Jia Baoyu, who was a charter girl. He was brought up in the women's chamber and is not kicked out when he should have. You should remember that these cousins, some of them are marriageable. And so he is allowed to hang around with folks that he can and would like to marry. If we go back to this question of true facts concealed, another way that people like to look at the novel is to think that there's a strong connection between Jia Baoyu and Cao Chuejin. This is a portrait that some people claim is Cao Chuejin. People were a little, they complained that he looks too fat. But anyway, some people think that it's autobiographical. As you can see from that chunk from the very beginning of the novel, there's something going on there. In one of the later sequels, one of these characters is supposed to be Cao Chuejin because he admits that he didn't get it right the first time, and he rewrites the novel for the sequel. This is a more stalwart figure of Cao Chuejin as a foe of feudal culture. And this is somebody's idea of him writing his novel. Cao family, very interesting. Cao Yin, extremely important guy, although did not have a big title. And then somebody actually wrote, a famous somebody, Jonathan Spence, wrote a novel just about him. But we know far less about Cao Chuejin himself because the family went into big trouble before Cao Chuejin got to his majority. And then there's a whole school of study on the novel called Hongshui, or Redology, a whole school on Cao Chuejin called Shaoshui. Here's a protest against that. The idea, of course, is that if we can only figure out all the details of Cao Chuejin's life, then we can figure out what everything in the novel means, which I think is a very disappointing idea. The novel circulated in manuscript during the author's life and for decades afterward as well. Here we have pictures of the text that's on the jade and on Xue Baochai's locket. That's something that ties the two of them together. There's a wooden stone tie, between Daiyu and Baoyu, and there's a gold and jade tie between Baoyu and Xue Baochai. So many, many manuscripts. These are different manuscripts where text has been copied from them and variants here. Only one of these is a printed edition. The first printed editions came out quite late. Cao Chuejin died around 1750. The printed editions came out in 1790s, and they are typeset, movable type. And so Gao, here's a picture of him. I want to see how we're doing time-wise. Oh, okay. And Gao claimed that he had just put together manuscripts that he had and just filled in small gaps, and people believe him or not. And so how do we know what Cao Chuejin might have thought about how the novel should end? In chapter 5, Jia Baoyu goes to the land of illusion and sees records, hints about what's going to happen. He can't understand them now, but we can, to a certain extent. And so we know that things should have ended pretty badly. The 120 chapter version ends the same way that the first chapter begins, only backwards. We get back to Cao Chuejin and Jia Yuzhen and people like that. The 1987 TV series followed ideas about how Cao Chuejin wanted the novel to end. And then here they're made into jokers. This is Lin Daiyu and Jia Baoyu. Not as famous as Journey to the West TV miniseries, but up there. They tried again in 2010, trying to be faithful to the 120 chapter version of the novel. There's another level of the text called the Precious Mirror of Love chapters, which is an early version of the novel that Cao Chuejin wrote, and so that's in the mix as well. So 3 different kind of levels in the 120 chapter version as we have it. Another reason the novel is so famous is that it was praised as exemplifying tragedy. When the Chinese found out that the Westerners were into tragedy, they had a tragedy envy. And then Wang Guowei, very famous person, using Schopenhauer's ideas, claimed that this was an example of tragedy. We've got tragedy. There have been many attempts to turn it into plays. This is a longer form Chunchi drama. You could actually perform for 20 hours or so. None of those stayed on the stage. In the 20th century, there were extracts of the plays that were performed. Many, many sequels. This is a list of them. And people have looked at these sequels and categorized them into some that want to improve on Daiyu, some that want to help out Daiyu. Daiyu doesn't have any money. And so in one sequel, when she cries, her cries turn into pearls. So she's all set. And then to work out the love affair between the two of them. And then, another person looking at these sequels has been very interested in the relationship between women and fiction in the 19th century when these sequels came out. And she sees many of these sequels are hospitable for women. And in fact, the only sequel that we know of, only fiction novel that we know of is that was written by a woman, that we can prove was written by a woman, is actually one of the sequels to the novel. In this case, it's all about the women after they're married and they have parties all over the time. It's not very exciting at all. So that's an introduction to some of the aspects of the novel. If you have questions later, you can bring them up. Now we want to turn to Bright, who's going to tell us what he did with this thing.
So, welcome to my dream. So, as a Chinese growing up in mainland China during the Cultural Revolution, and it was a novel firstly forbidden, and then it was allowed by the end of the Cultural Revolution because Madame Mao sort of encouraged the people to read it for some reason. So we read it, but in China there was a saying, when you were young, you're not supposed to read Dream of the Red Chambers, because it tells you all the bad things you're not supposed to do. But we read it. And then later on, when it was opened, political atmosphere was better, and I also read again. And, being a composer, we're also thinking about what we could turn into an opera. That's always a question. They constantly have the nose, like a dog nose, and figure it out what would be a good opera subject. And I did think about Hong Lou Meng as a possibility, but then I immediately dismissed it, because this is a project just too complicated and it's too daunting. And to my surprise, after 35 years of Chinese economic reform, or political reform after the Cultural Revolution, since Deng Xiaoping, and nobody in China actually attempted an opera version of this novel. So, but it was just only in the back of my head, think about, okay, maybe one day I'll do it, but I never could seriously attack that problem of complexity and the depth and the breadth of the novel, until I got a call from the San Francisco Opera, which is a very major opera house in the country and one of the best in the world. They said, they didn't ask me, would you be interested in writing an opera? They said, what do you think of this as an opera subject? I said, okay, it is interesting possibility, but one has to be really careful what you do. How do you devote an opera subject to a big novel like this? As David had just showed you, the complexity. The novel has over 40 main characters and about 400 small characters who have names. And the story, the family tree, we just try to follow the novel, and it takes a lot of effort. An opera, an evening of opera, if you're not writing a ring cycle for 5 days and then stop, an hour, 2 hours, maybe 3 hours at the most. So when you reduce an opera libretto when you compare opera libretto to a play, it's maybe 45-minute play because you have to leave a lot of room for music. So to give you example, Othello, Shakespeare's Othello, when Verdi adapted that, and he not only reduced the 5 acts into 4, but he also, in terms of number of words, his word is about a quarter of Shakespeare's words. So that gives you an idea how much reduction an opera needs. But on one hand, opera has disadvantage because you can't tell a very complicated story. When we read a novel, then we see a movie adaptation, we always disappointed because of a lot of layers and intricacies in the novel. If it's a great novel, it's never quite be able to be presented properly in even a good movie. And then when you think about play, it's even more reduction, and then an opera, even more reduction. So with all these reductions in mind, we decided to David Henry Huang, who's a great playwright. He has won Tonys and Broadway shows, and his Chinglish was on Broadway. It was a Broadway hit. I asked him, because we worked on another project early on, many years ago, called the Silver River, which is a Chinese legend about the Niu Lang Zhinyu, the cowherd and the goddess weaver, how they meet once a year through the bridge formed by magpie and all that. That's a one-act multimedia Chinese opera, Western opera theater. We have an actress, we have a dancer, we have musicians on stage, we have Chinese opera singers, we have an opera singer on stage. So it's kind of mixed thing. We actually produced, with the help of CCS, about 10 years ago at UM. For those of you who missed that, I'm sorry, but we might do it again. But in any case, this is a lot more complicated. But immediately I thought of David. I thought, okay, if anybody can do, David can do. So I asked him, and actually I went to the premiere of the Chinglish in Chicago. I asked him, we had lunch. He said no. He said, that's not a good idea. That's complicated. You get yourself into a mess. But I said, okay, one has to be really careful about this. But on the other hand, if you do the right, that would be a great showcase of not only of the novel, but also the Chinese culture and the 18th century and 19th century Chinese aristocratic lifestyle, which is unknown in the West. There's a lot of potential to do it really well, but one has to be really careful. So eventually I persuaded him. And so we decided to do this. So we reduced. So here's what we have. So we reduced, this is the synopsis, so I just want to show you the characters. We reduced to Bao Yu, a divine stone, as you see, that has to be there, the lead tenor, a lyric tenor, and Daiyu, we didn't call him call her mushroom, we called her a much better crimson pearl flower. More poetic for opera.
That's a direct translation of how she's referred to in.
I'm sure it is. I totally agree. Yeah. Okay, so now Bao Chai, it's her rival to Bao Yu, from wealthy family, and Madame Wang, who works as a negative force in the novel and also in the opera, and Granny Jia. Of course, we need that, and Princess Jia, who's the concubine, and Aunt Xue, because Aunt Xue is an important character, even though she has a small role in the opera. But because Daiyu is an orphan, by the half of the novel, she lost her father as well. She started losing her mother, and that's therefore she was taken in by her grandmother, the Jia family. And then by middle of the novel, and her father died. She's an orphan. But to show the difference between her and Bao Chai is not an orphan, so Bao Chai must have her mother around. So that's the mother. And then we have the monk, which is a representative, a combination of the Taoist and the monk in the novel. And then maids and females and servants and all this garden, imperial soldiers, eunuchs, and so forth. Okay, so we reduced the opera into a cast of 7, plus the monk, who is an actor, a narrator. So how do we do this? So first of all, we want to take advantage of many mysteries remain in the novel. There are many things who are not quite resolved. There are many questions people read, and that partially why people are so fascinated by the novel was because there are a lot of things are not. It's kind of mystery. It didn't quite make sense, but seems like they're all important clues. And also the most important fact is that Cao Xueqin didn't finish his novel. He only finished 80 chapters. So the last 40 chapters were basically rewritten by someone else. Whoever the author is still debatable. But also the other thing is about the novel itself is autobiographic of Cao himself. So we took those two advantage, and we studied Cao Xueqin's own family story, and we also took the ending, slightly a departure from Gaoer's ending, but we would like to think more to the original point in the novel that hinted in the first 80 chapters. So we came up with a at least self-explainable story. And when at the early stage, David Huang and I had this conversation about how much we should be faithful to the novel. And when you come to from adaptation from one media to another, how much you're going to change. And David has done a lot, not only Broadway movies, TV series, he's working on TV series and operas and play, of course, his thing, he was a playwright. And he says, it's inevitable. You have the license of changing things, because otherwise it would not work. Things works in one media, it does not work. As long as we try to be faithful to the original intention of the author. So, but on the surface of the novel, or the forefront of the novel, there is this triangle love story between Bao Yu and Daiyu and Bao Chai. And Bao Yu and Daiyu are the only, of the over 400 characters in the novel, these two are the only two that were preordained. In other words, they have a pre-life connection. She was this mushroom or flower, and nurtured by morning dews on the stone. The stone just actually accidentally collected, because I imagine there's a crack on the stone. There's a little flower or weed that comes out, and there was a little dimple on the stone, so it collects the morning dew and nurtured her for 3,000 years. And therefore, they had this preordained relationship, and they decide to go down to earth to experience, to fulfill, in our opera, is to fulfill at least in the novel, I think partially, was to fulfill in flesh their love. And the monk told them, no, that's a bad idea. You're going to be disappointed. Don't do it. And of course, they don't listen, and they came down. And but then the other side of Bao Cai, I think, in the novel also represents the perfect woman in the society that she grew up with. She was from a very wealthy merchant, imperial merchant. Her family does business for the emperor. However, they were never named during those times, Qing Dynasty, or until recently, I think in the Chinese society, merchant was looked down upon, even though they had money. They looked down upon because they just have a lot of money, but there's no class, no social status. And so she wanted, in her family, to get into, become somebody in the social class ladder. And therefore, she first appeared, the purpose of her coming to Beijing, her family coming to, was to join the competition to be a concubine, admitted into the palace, getting closer to the emperor, just like Bao Yu's sister, who was already at the beginning of the novel and a concubine. But then, of course, she was promoted to the favorite, one of the favorite concubines. So, therefore, our story is the first half was the rise of the Jia family, at the motion of Jia's sister, that their daughter was promoted to be one of the favorite concubines, gets very close to the emperor, so became powerful. And then the second half of the opera, which is the second act, is the fall of the Jia family after she lost her political struggle at the court in the palace. As you know, these concubines in those days were not. I don't envy them. They were very young ladies. They happened to be very beautiful, and they have to have a good family background to be elected, to be selected as the concubine. Once they are in, they became each other. They tried to kill each other because there was so much. Because there's a power. Once you're closer to the emperor, you became the favorite concubine or wife, and you have power. So not only you, but your family, the whole family, the clan, gets a lot of prestige and the power. So they're killing each other, but also they were young, but the whole threshold of carrying the burden of the rise and fall of the whole family clan rise on your shoulder as a young woman. And you not only have to please the emperor, but you have to, in this very high power struggle. Think about it, you are a senator in the U.S. Congress, you are 16. And the whole, you have to do this and have pleased the emperor. So there's a lot of things carried on that. So we used the opera as the triangle. Again, the triangle is the forefront story. And then the political intrigue is in the background. So you must have, the foreground is this triangle story, love story, how the preordained soulmates, once they saw each other, they think they're soulmates, and they are totally mesmerized by each other. And then Bao Cai came because Madame Wang didn't like the idea. Because not only, there are many reasons. In the novel it was never clear. So to me, and David and I talked about this, I said, I talked to a lot of redologists in China. I said, why doesn't Madame Wang like Daiyu? There are many reasons, and there are clues in the novel. For example, there's a one time Granny Jia said in front of a lot of people in a big party said, my daughter-in-law, Madam Wang, is dumb as a wood. And so just like that. And then also Madam Wang once told the girls at one time, he said, you think your life is like the princess life, huh? And you have to remember Daiyu's mother, who grew up during the heydays of the Jia clan. And her life was really a princess life. And she was also, Granny Jia at the very beginning said, your mother was my favorite daughter. Of all my children, she was my favorite. So think about a young girl growing up in that environment. And also Daiyu, as we all know in the novel, has a very sharp tongue. And very, on the surface, she's a nice lady and a very poised and a very cultured. She writes the best poem in the whole novel. But she's also arrogant because she knew that she's smarter than the rest of everybody. So, and where did she get the sharp tongue? Usually from the mother. So you think about the mother probably had a sharp tongue and grew up very beautiful and most favored in the family. When a daughter-in-law, Madam Wang, came to the family like a wood, not very smart, not very beautiful. Nobody mentioned she was graceful or beautiful, and marry into the family. The sister-in-law probably offended her many times. And then eventually in Chinese culture, the mother, your daughter-in-law, you bite your tongues, you swallow your suffering until you become the mother-in-law. Then you turn everything to your daughter-in-law. That's the Chinese culture. So now the sister-in-law is finally married out and died actually. But now her daughter came back. And now if she marries my son, I'm going to deal with her like a reincarnation of my sister-in-law, whom I hate for the rest of my life. Of course, on a personal level, she hates that. In the novel also, she not only does she hate Daiyu, but also anybody looks like a Daiyu, she killed them. And so there's some personal hatred about that. And there's also in the novel, we know at the very beginning of the Jia novel, the Jia family had already financially declined. They, on surface, these are wonderful houses, and they have a luxury lifestyle. But deep inside, they already owed a lot of money, and it's like, beautiful houses. You can put your finger through. There's the termites, and already the wall is already soft like a tofu. So you think about that kind of image, and then so what happens? So we used some of the Cao's family story, because Cao, his grandfather or his father, there's debatable who Cao Xueqing is, because Cao Xueqing himself wasn't in the family tree, official family tree of the Cao family tree. But there are other people who have written articles or mentioned, or poems mentioned, he was part of the Cao family. So people assumed he was the grandson of Cao Ying, who was the a personal friend with Kangxi, Emperor Kangxi. But he was, but in any case, during Kangxi's time, Cao family was the heyday of the Cao family. Kangxi visited their houses 4 times. During Kangxi's time, Cao's position wasn't an important high position. It was more like a FBI position. You have an FBI bureau, and sits in the south. You have a direct red phone line to the president's house. and he could write letters directly to the emperor, report on the other things, and he collects taxes on the textile, which is a lucrative business. But every time Kangxi visits in the south province, he stayed in their house. He didn't have to stay in their house. He could stay somewhere else. And Cao Ying's mother was Kangxi's what do you call it? Nursemaid. And what's very interesting, because Kangxi himself, the life of Kangxi didn't grow up with either fatherly love or motherly love, because he was mostly brought up by Cao Ying's mother. So he was very close to Cao Ying's mother. When he visited in the south, he said, "That's my mother." He called it, "This is my mother." Called her and wrote big letters, big words about that. So they were very powerful until Kangxi died. They owed a lot of money. How much money they owed? Somebody wrote a letter to the emperor. During Kangxi's end of life, towards his last few years, he realizes that there's so much corruption and people owed so much money. He asked his son, which turned out to be the Yongzhen, the next emperor, at the time was a prince, to collect them. And he started to collect them, including the Caos, and got a lot of trouble. Eventually, he gave up the idea, because eventually there's just too many tied directly to him. So, but at the time, people wrote to Kangxi, said the Cao family owed over 3 million ounces. Liang, how much is a liang?
In house.
Yeah, 3 million ounces of silver. That's a lot of money. And then, but he wrote back. He said, "Okay, I checked into that." He said, "They say you have over 3 million, but it's only over 1 million. If you can pay back, try to pay back, then we'll forget about this." Of course, there's no way they pay back, and most of the money is spent on his visiting. When he visits 4 times, stayed in their house, and they built gardens and houses and to accommodate the emperor. So all this money he owed. When he died, his son came. This is like a Xi Jinping now, and started to clean the house, and then, of course, they were in trouble. They couldn't turn back, return the money, pay back. And so we use that crisis as a dramatic threshold in the novel, in the opera, that at the very beginning, and one of the bigger problems was for Madame Wang, was that she realizes one day she will inherit this whole house, whole Jia clan, and she will become the matriarch. And then what's she going to do with this huge money, imperial debt, the household? Sooner or later, they're going to be in trouble. So she thought the only solution was to have a Bao Chai marry into Jia, because they have a lot of money. And so once they marry, they can use that money to pay back, and there wouldn't be a problem. Actually, the emperor thought of that too. So we, in the novel, the emperor thought of that too. Through the concubine, the Jia, Princess Jia, and she hinted that to promote the marriage between Bao Yu and Bao Chai. And everybody thought if they get married, these 2 clans got married, and they can have enough money to pay back this imperial debt, and everything will be happy and dandy. Of course, tragedy always goes tragedy. It's not that simple. Even though Madame Wang did everything she could to promote marriage, and they kind of made this marriage between Bao Chai and Bao Yu at the end of the opera too. But everything, fall apart, because the emperor is a smarter political player above all. I won't reveal the end of the story, because you have to come Thursday or come to San Francisco to find out the ending. But so that's one thing. The other thing is, David Huang and I feel the same way, is that most of the Chinese novels that they don't really have this character development in the Western drama, like we do in Western drama. For example, the character of Daiyu started by being a sickly, tearful young lady, very talented, and writes the best poem and all that. And she started that way, and she ends her life that way. She's still sickly and tearful, cries all the time, and writes poem. At the end, she died of sickness, according to the last 40 chapters solution, which most rhetoriologists would agree that's not Cao Xueqing's original intention. So we thought, okay, we got to have, Daiyu has to do something. And you think about in these days, a woman's only chance of happiness is to marry well. Marry well in many, what does that mean, marry well? Of course, from the family point of view, marry well is marry into wealth, status, and then you'll be taken care of. But in these young people's mind, marry well is to find your love. And you might be lucky to find somebody you really spend the rest of your life, although you don't decide. The family decides these things. But so I think that's something in her mind, in Daiyu's mind, in Bao Chai's mind as well. Although she was a good daughter, she would do everything to advance her family's status, social status. But she was also thinking about, if I could marry well, find somebody I love. At the young girl growing up, before all these other things that falls on your shoulder. So we thought, okay, Daiyu must make a stand at the end. She's not going to die of sickness. She's going to make a stand. So how do you make a stand in those circumstances? The social and the feudal system was so overwhelming and so powerful. And your marriage is completely not up to you, including Bao Yu. Although he was a very spoiled child, he was the only heir of the Jia clan. But there's only certain things you can do. And the marriage is not choice. Marriage choice is not one of them. So we decided Daiyu has to die, choose her death herself. So I can tell you the ending of the opera. So she drowns herself, walks into a lake. And so at the end of the opera, the stage is transformed into a big lake. And then she sings, she says, basically, I'm here to repay my tears. Now my tears are dry. There's nothing left for me. And she sings this over the a cappella choral singing and slowly walks into the lake. That's the end of the opera. Very sad but striking scene. We have a great stage director, Stan Lai, who is an iconic stage director in Asian language, in Chinese, in Taiwan, and Hong Kong, especially in China, mainland China. And we also have the set designer, Tim Yip, who is won the art direction of Oscar in the Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon movie. And he's also a fabulous designer who designs both the sets and costumes for this opera. And I've seen his first draft of design is fabulous, and his goal was to transform the stage, including costume and design, to make it a dreamlike. So everything is kind of translucent, and also the stage moves. I love the set moves according to the drama and the music. Rather than just one set from the beginning to end, you see that. And so these many sets, things move, and it's quite beautiful. So come to San Francisco. So what I would like to finishing this and by playing a couple of important arias that I have done, and we did some showcase in New York with the orchestra. One of them is Daiyu's most important poem writing in the novel, Zhang Hua's The Petals Burial Aria. So, which is quite long. We didn't use all the text, but we took the most essence of the idea. We used that as the text for a soprano solo aria at the top of second act. And then with the tenor aria before he became. So to me, also one of the elements of the story in the novel is a boy's come of age. From Bao Yu is a young boy, spoiled and in a very prestigious family, and then he became the come of life. By the end, he realizes what's going on, and so his aria called the coming of age aria, which is preceded by a poem burning scene by Daiyu in the pyre. She burned all before she died. She burned all the poems, which is a symbol of their love, the poems they wrote together. So I can play these two, and I see if I could project the text on that. But before we do that, I want to have a conversation with David, because I visited David's class earlier last fall. We talked about the approach to the opera, to his Honlomon class. So I'm interested from a scholar, a rheologist, if I will. Is it totally outrageous to you that we changed and reshaped the story?
百花齐放. And so I think that different approaches are very interesting. And so many people mock all the sequels. There's 50-some sequels. But in each case, they indicate that there was something about the novel that they wanted to change. And so that's always an interesting commentary. My first books were on commentary to fiction. And these are records of readings in which people, some of these commentators were mucking with the text at the same time. So I like to see all different kinds of versions.
So what do you think of all these mysteries in the novel? In your opinion, why we never, after all these digging, I mean, people said he had finished more than 80 chapters, right?
Correct.
And what happened to the other chapters? And after all these years, people been searching, looking in the, antique stores and all that, and tried to find that they completely disappeared and left all this a big void, if you will, or big mystery, which made all the study and theory more fascinating. But why do you think that happened, in your opinion?
Well, we know that he wrote at least 30 more chapters beyond the 80. While he was alive, it only circulated in manuscript copies of 80 chapters long. And once you get past chapter 80, you get into more sensitive material. In the novel, the household is confiscated, and that reflects on what happened to the Cao household as well. And that was imperial business that was involved with the confiscation. And so it seems most likely that he was not really willing to see those chapters circulate more widely. We know, for instance, at one time, 10 chapters were lost at one go. So not many copies were made of these later chapters. We do have chapter titles are recorded in commentary. Bao Yu was supposed to end up in prison, for instance, which doesn't happen in chapter 120. So the main problem is that the more you got toward the end, the more sensitive it was going to be. We have records that one of his relatives forced him to change earlier parts of the chapters. And so it's not only political sensitivity, but the sensitivity of his family that put a lot of pressure on him. And he was probably between a rock and a hard place. And he was going to offend somebody whichever way he went.
You know, one of the theory was that Emperor Qianlong, who was the grandson of Kangxi, also realized there's a lot of foreshadowing of the real political imperial struggle, power struggle within the novel, and kind of abandoned and destroyed the ending, and commissioned
The rewriting.
rewriting for the ending, the last 40 chapters, and published in the sort of a governmental imperial publishing house. Is that true?
We have no record of that. But the novel is very interesting because it is called forth all kinds of stories. There was one story, for instance, that Cao Zhiqian got his ideas from Shakespeare. That a visitor to Cao Yin was telling Cao Yin about Shakespeare, and Cao Zhiqian was young, and he was back, and he overheard some of it. And so you get all kinds of stories. And again, because there's so many holes in the novel, it's clearly not finished. It's an invitation to be creative as a reader.
So that gives us a lot of points of departure, so to speak, to do art and opera. So I hope you can all come Thursday, this Thursday in 2 days, 8 o'clock at the Stamps Theater, Auditorium, North Campus of the Arthur Miller Theater. We're doing my voice department in my school is doing a workshop, which is essentially the students, voice students, singing through with piano the entire opera. The purpose of the workshop is for us, the creative team and the production team from San Francisco Opera, everybody's coming from San Francisco Opera also, to hear the piece and to find its problem, what we need to rewrite. So we would like to hear, if you come and hear it and have questions or suggestions, please email me. We'll take that into consideration between now and premiere, which is September 10th in San Francisco. There are 6 performances in San Francisco throughout September. So between now and September, we still hope to do some revision. So now I would like to play the Petals Burial aria. Okay, so
It's come up.
which is preceded by a little interview we did. David and I did it. This is a workshop we did in New York, not working, called the Showcase by Opera America during their annual conference. And we did this aria with a small orchestra. Dream of the Red Chamber is the most beloved Chinese novel.
It's generally considered sort of the pinnacle of Chinese literature, and there's an entire school of academic study, Redology, which is devoted simply to studying this one novel.
So it's a daunting idea for an opera. I was actually approached by the San Francisco Opera for this story.
Bright then asked me to do the libretto, and I said no, because I felt like, oh, come on, the novel has 50 major characters and 400 minor characters, and I'm like, I don't know how we make this into an opera. And because Bright lived through the Cultural Revolution, his will is stronger than mine, and eventually he got me to do it.
David Huang and I worked very hard on paring down the story.
We have distilled it down to an essential love triangle. This young man and his soulmate, we also see before they are born on earth. And they are warned by a monk that this will be a futile exercise which will end in sorrow, but they don't listen to him and they come down anyway.
I think this is an opera, it should be liked by the general audience. If people like Puccini, like Verdi, like Carmen.
It's capturing a world of ancient China which is lost to us today.
It's a showcase of Chinese aristocratic lifestyle of the 18th century and the 19th century.
I was really excited that we got Stan Lai for our director. Stan is one of the most beloved contemporary directors in China. He's also completely bilingual, bicultural. He grew up in San Francisco.
He knows both culture quite well.
Tim Yip, the designer, is probably best known for having won an Oscar for Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. It's a fantastic team that I think will both be true to the spirit of the Chinese work and create a production that's really accessible for Western audiences.
If it's a good story, if it's a good drama, and the music is wonderful, people enjoy it, or thrilled by it, touched by it, it will have its legs.
How do you fix it? Huh? No, this is sorry about that. Okay, I think we'll stop here, right out the dot. But we can take questions for those of you who are. Oh, second one is another. It's a little long. It's about 10 minutes, so we're running out of time. But come Thursday, you hear the whole opera. Yeah, that's a very good question. I always felt that if we do, we go into Hong Kong after San Francisco next year, next March. I always felt that we need to have a Chinese version if we do in a Chinese-speaking countries. So we are, I'm working after this. We have somebody. We are looking for somebody actually to commission a Chinese translation. I want to go back to the style, the Chinese style, not somebody who's good in English, but in classical Chinese style, the style of Cao Xueqing's, the novel. And I would like to do a Chinese version, because most of in opera, sometimes we have, original was in Italian or was in German. We translate into English or Chinese. But it was the translation was always done by someone else. So they are limited how much they can do, freedom they can do, because the language is a very important factor in setting up the melody. But this composer is still alive, so I will do another version. So that's my intention. But probably maybe not have time to finish for this Hong Kong performance. But I would like to do a Chinese version, yes. Question? Well, thank you very much for coming.